Thank you for joining us for the thesis presentations for the class of 2026. I think you will be pleased and you will enjoy yourself this evening to see the wide variety of topics that our students have chosen and the hard work that they have put in. I am going to say hello to everyone on behalf of Dr. Finley, and maybe she'll be able to speak during the break. We are part of the Atlanta University Center, or the Atlanta University Center Collective for Art History and Curatorial Studies. I think that our successes are wide and very well known, so I won't go into everything. But when I introduce the students, I will share with you what their next steps will be. I'm also speaking this evening on behalf of Professor Myra Green, who unfortunately could not be with us this evening. Welcome again to this exciting event. It's but one of our four senior presentations and showcases that we have been doing last week and this week. And is the senior show still up? Part two? Tomorrow. Okay, we have a senior show, art show in this CIA gallery which closes tomorrow. So please definitely visit if you can. The Art History program and Curatorial program, as I mentioned previously, are part of the Atlanta University Collective for Art History and Curatorial Studies. And we are also located within the Department of Art and Visual Culture here at Spelman. Our majors are from Spelman, Morehouse, and Clark Atlanta University. The majors within our program, and we're very unusual for a program here on campus. We have art history, documentary filmmaking, and photography. We also have many exciting minors, including curatorial studies, interactive media, and game design development. Now I would like to recognize all of the faculty in the room who have brought this program to fruition. I'll take these glasses off. I'll start to my left, Dr. Chad Dawkins. Dr. Michelle Lexon. Dr. Cody Hausman. And Dr. Abayami Ola. I would also like to recommend introduce two smiling faces in the back, Professor Nidia Blass and Professor Kelly Mitchell. Join us this evening. And I would also like to introduce you to our visiting assistant professor for 2005-2006, Professor Margaret Nagala. Okay, so now I want to give you a sense of the show this evening. We're going to do it a little bit differently than usual. Normally we have each student present their thesis work to you, and then we have a question and answer session. And we have 8 seniors this evening, and we're dividing the show into 2 parts, part 1 and part 4. So 4 students will present, and then we'll have a question and answer for all of the students. Hence the panel setup. We'll have a break, and then again, we'll go to 4 students and have another panel question and answer. The 4 students who will be presenting in just a few moments Daniel Brown, who is a major in art history, and he will be attending New York University, Steinhardt for Visual Arts Administration for potential career and exhibition coordination. Anita Gilbert will be presenting. She's a graduating senior art history major, curatorial studies minor, from Philadelphia. She will be studying contemporary art at Sotheby's Institute of Art in New York City. We also Candice Lawrie is a senior art history major at Clark Atlanta University, and she currently serves as the assistant to the registrar at the Clark Atlanta University Art Museum through a grant from the Educational Advancement Foundation. Upon graduation, she'll begin a collections processing internship at the AUC Robert W. Woodruff Library. But also, Olivia Jones will be presenting. Her major is art history, minor curatorial studies, and her next steps are pursuing a Master of Library and Information Science at the University of Maryland, College Park. Let's give them a big round. Mr. Brown, you have the floor.
One second, we have people watching on Zoom, so you have to make sure they can see it too.
Evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So my name is Daniel Brown. I am a senior art history, a major. I go to Leavenworth College, and I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but raised in Queens, New York. And so today we're going to be discussing my thesis on the absorption of radical intent, especially like in regards to avant-garde, to avant-garde and institutions, and focusing on one key problem, on like what happens to radical art once it enters the museum. So the avant-garde has always positioned itself into systems of authority. The artists aim to they aim to break down boundaries between art and life, challenging traditional censorship and to resist commodification. However, there is the paradox at the center of the movement. the more radical that work is, the more likely it is to be preserved, exhibited, and basically absorbed into into very institutions it's sought to challenge. My research examines this paradox through three key formatives: cut piece, do it so nice, and interior scroll. Each of these works resisted control in different ways, whether through chance or embodied authorship. Yet all have since been canonized into the museum. The central question that is guiding this project asks to what extent the radical intent cause this neutralization when avant-garde performance enters these institutional frameworks. My argument is that when it comes to the neutralization, it is not a complete erasure, but instead institutions transforms these works by stabilizing and framing them while traces of their original disruption continues to persist. To better understand this process, it's important to look at key theoretical perspectives. First we have Peter Rigors, who argues that the historical avant-garde attempted to join art into everyday life by dismantling institutions like museums. However, he claims that this project ultimately failed because institutions absorbed these radical gestures and converted them into parts of art history. Building all of this, Benjamin H.G. Loubeau explains that under advanced capitalism, even oppositional art becomes a form of cultural value. Next we have Andrea Fraser, who pushes this further by arguing that institutions are not passive spaces, but active producers of meaning. Once a work enters the museum, its meaning is shaped through curatorial framing, audience expectations, as well as the context that's based on the museum. And lastly, we have Claire Bishop, who argues that participation itself has also become institutionalized, meaning that even the audience interaction is now structured and controlled, and together these mindsets show that institutional absorption is not simply about laws, but also about the overall transformation. So our first case study centers around cut piece by Yoko Ono. So cut piece is a performance that is built entirely on the audience participation. Ono sat down motionless on the stage, while audience members were invited to approach her and cut away pieces of clothing. The work was created in a situation in which viewers were forced to confront their own ethical boundaries as participation could quickly shift from passive engagement into something that is more aggressive. The radical intent of the piece emerged from the real possibility of harm, meaning that nobody was meaning that nobody would expect something to happen. The audience was not simply observing the work, but actively engaging in it, which made them complicit in the unfolding action. However, once the performers entered the museums, for example, the Museum of Modern Art, its meaning began to shift. The work became accessible primarily through photographs and video documentation. Instead of being placed in a position of engagement, viewers now observe the performance from a safe distance. The theatrical tension remains visible, but it is no longer experienced in real time. The work's radical force is not erased, but immediacy and risk are softened. Next, we have Duets on Ice, which was performed by Lawrie Anderson. Duets on Ice operates through a different kind of instability. Anderson stood on blocks of ice while playing violin, and the performance ended when the ice melted, and she could no longer maintain her balance. The duration and outcome of the work were determined by environmental conditions rather than the control of the artist. The reliance on chance positioned the work as a critique of traditional ideas and mastery, as well as stability. One performed in public spaces is further disrupted expectations by engaging audiences who are not prepared for that artistic experience. Once the work was documented and circulated through institutions such as the kitchen, the overall accessibility was transformed. The unpredictable unfolding of the performance became condensed into images as well as descriptions. Viewers were no longer experiencing the suspense of waiting for the ice to melt, but instead encounter a fixed version of the process. The work shifts from a lived experience of uncertainty into a narrative about uncertainty, which alters the original impact. Our final case study is on Interior Scroll by Carolee Shimon. Interior Scroll directly confronts the gendered structures of artistic authority. Shimon stood nude before an audience, painted her body, and extracted a scroll from her body while reading a text that critiques male dominance in the arts discourse. The performance was radical in its assertion that the female body functions as a site of intellectual production. It challenged the historical reduction of women to objects of vision by positioning the body as both the author as well as the medium. In its life form, the work produced discomfort and forced audiences to confront their assumptions about gender, knowledge, and authority. However, when the performance entered the archives, it became primarily known through photographs and written accounts. This transformation shifts the experiences from conversation to interpretation. The work still remains powerful, of course, but its structure needs to is reduced as it becomes framed within art historical narratives. The female body as a medium. Across these case studies, the female body emerges as a central medium of avant-garde expression, rather than functioning as an object to be viewed. The body becomes a site of resistance. In earlier works, like a cut piece, the body exposes the ethical dynamics of spectatorship. In later works like Victoria Scroll and Dual Nights, the body becomes more explicitly tied to questions of control and visibility. And even within the even like within these institutional contexts, the body retains a degree of resistance, while documentation can frame and interpret these works. It cannot fully eliminate the vulnerability and tension embedded in the body itself. This allows traces of radical intent to persist even as the works are historicized. Institutional, the institutional visualization operates through curatorial framing. The performances that once depended on the wrist are transformed into stable objects of knowledge. The shift from the live event to archival artifacts fundamentally alters how these works are experienced. At the same time, however, institutionalization ensures that the survival of these works and file documentation, as well as archival systems. Many of these works would simply just vanish. This this essentially creates a paradox in which institutions both diminish and sense the breach of radical intent. So rather than being fully erased, the radical intent is reframed, and the works lose some of their immediacy, but they gain new forms, new forms of visibility. So avant-garde performances cannot fully escape institutional absorption, and neutralization is something that is very difficult to avoid. However, this does not mean that the radical intent disappears entirely. Instead, these works exist in a state of tension between loss and persistence. They no longer function in the same way as the original performances, but they continue to provoke thought and critical reflection. What remains is not the original experience, but the trace of its disruption is, which continues to challenge all these, which continues to challenge the viewers even within the structures that seeks to contain it. And that is all. Thank you so much for listening. She's like feminist. Okay, so I was looking like that was in there. Really? Yes. So like she put that out her. What comes after? Yeah, for sure. It's like this is crazy. This is crazy. Like just like it may like seem the same. But it's not. It is not at all. Because this is very different than the scroll. Yeah. I love that. That's the actual thing that came out. It is. Yeah. Good job.
Hey. Hi,
everyone, my name is Nina Gilbert. I'm a graduating art history curatorial studies major from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and today I'll be presenting my research on contemporary intersectional women's collectives titled Organized Artistry in the Face of Oppression. Okay, so starting off, examining what it means to exist as a creative. So to exist as a creative is to coexist with your retrospective community, and the various disciplines that make up sort of the arts ecosystem work well within each other to provide support for each individual artist's mission and passion. Artist collectives act as the physical embodiment of this concept, and numerous artist collectives have had and continue to exert a substantial amount of important impact on the different periods of art history, as well as artists are a product of their time. So in a broader context, this does not only apply to the visual, writer groups and musical ensembles can also be called artist collectives or groups. And the purpose of an artist collective is to connect with fellow artists to highlight the avant-garde movements in art broadly and to distance from conventional sort of academic methods in order to innovate and pursue these goals. For instance, through organizing through collaborative exhibitions with the foundation of changing discriminatory and societal structures. So my argument is that this work uses historical and contemporary methodologies in analyzing the work of intersectional practicing creatives and their undeniable achievements and their contributions to the art world. Okay, so first we must examine the origins of the art collective. So with the predominant first and second wave feminist movements of the United States and the United Kingdom, it excluded Black women by emphasizing the objectives of white middle-class women rather than addressing the distinct overlapping issues encountered by women of color across the diaspora. The wider art community outside of the first women's collective, the Society of Women Artists, their early years and they actively opposed Black involvement. An example being in the United States, artist Augusta Savage was refused a study opportunity in France solely due to her race in the early 20th century. A choice that showcased the blatant racial bias present in the international art communities. The obstacles encountered by Black women included not only being excluded from all female organizations, but also from mainly Black male organizations and artistic movements, and completely from mainly white mainstream entities. The dual marginalization resulted in Black women frequently having to establish their own support systems and exhibition chances apart from the established organizations such as the SWA. Moving on to new voices. So the rise of accessibility that came with the Black arts movement came with the notions of exclusivity and luxury. Research stemmed from the lack of women's work highlighted. Spiral being one of the most notable art collectives to come out of this movement, while notable for its achievements in activism and its artistic community, there has been much criticism regarding their male-only creative body, often referred to as a boys' club, with the exception of the inclusion of Emma Amos. Faith Ringgold was left out of the prominent Black artist collective Spiral because of the existing sexism in the male-centric group and the contrasting opinions on the essence of Black art. Established in 1963 by notable practicing creatives Romare Beard and Norman Lewis, the organization sought to evaluate the positions of Black artists in society and investigate the Black aesthetic, contextualizing the civil rights movement. As mentioned previously, its formation resembled a boys' club, and the members didn't feel at ease with women artists as their peers, as pointed out by Emma Amos. Moving on to the most prominent example of the first Black feminist artist collective to exist in a contemporary sphere, Where We At sets the standard as a trailblazing organization that changed the path of career advancement for Black women in the United States forever. The collective Where We At, Black Women Artists Incorporated, WWA, was an innovative group established in New York in 1971 to create a space for support, visibility, and self-determination for Black women artists who felt excluded by the predominantly white mainstream art world and male-centric Black arts movement. Established by artists Dinga McCannon, Kay Brown, and Faith Ringgold, among others, the WWA emerged as a powerful entity in advancing Black women's art and encouraging much needed community involvement. Okay. With the rise of accessibility that came with the Black arts movement came bold women. So I'm sorry. First, we'll be talking about sort of the ripple effects that came with the Black arts movement. So Bold Women, located at the Spencer Museum, debuting there, its emphasis on creatives with intersecting identities is imperative to the advancement of women's arts. It is imperative to this research to show as a concrete example of women's artistry and intersectional identities. Opening a show like this in the rural Midwest plays a larger strategic role in the accessibility to exhibitions such as these. Bold Women has exhibited at the Spencer, highlights institutional frameworks and its blockages, rising above all historical accounts. So this research actually would not be substantial without referencing Hearts of Our People in 2020, debuting at the Minneapolis Museum of Art, as this body of work highlights the artistic achievements from a contemporary intersectional perspective. A dynamic exhibition featuring the works of and achievements of Native American women. Women have always historically been the driving force behind Native American art, and Hearts of Our People marks the inaugural significant exhibition dedicated exclusively to their creations and artistic ministry. Currently, Indigenous peoples may not be seen as fading away, yet their languages, cultures, and artistic traditions are perceived as being on the verge of extinction due to calculated systemic targeting. If Western art is viewed as contemporary and Indigenous art viewed as historical, the implication that they have no relevance now or in the future. As mentioned previously, the past accomplishments of women of color and their respective collectives may have acted as a stepping stone for conversations about the future of non-white ideologies, reminding audiences of presenting peoples and their artistry. The exhibition Women of Afrofuturism, located at the San Francisco International Airport, showcases Black feminist identity and power. The exhibition showcases how Black women directly contributed to sending humanity into its next space. This exhibition is also interesting in regards to creative discourse as an AI artwork was included in the exhibition. They are progressive in their own right, but they are not excluded from criticism from the art world. And I'll get into my thoughts on that later. We don't have time for all that. So here is a sort of a flyer from Dingham and Cannon, who was, like I mentioned, one of the founding members of Where We At. So moving on to today, moving on to the contemporary. Organized artistry and the artists collectives that actively exist today still maintain the foundational themes seen in the first collectives. The artist collectives seen today work to build community while maintaining activism, while still including their intersectional identities and practices. Contemporary art groups play a crucial role as they deconstruct the illusion of individual genius or the sort of unstable, isolated artist, demonstrating that unionization frequently results in the deeper social and artistic advancements, especially among communities of color. So moving on to the first contemporary collective, we have Black Trans Femmes in the Arts Collective, and it's a grassroots group based in Brooklyn, focused on building a supportive environment for Black trans women and non-binary femmes to flourish as artists. Established in 2019 by Jordan J., the collective emerged to tackle systemic marginalization of Black trans individuals within the mainstream and cultural institutions. Through a focused platform, BTFA guarantees that these creators have access to resources, visibility, and community backing needed to establish lasting creative careers. Central to their mission is BTFA Studios, a versatile creative center that provides complimentary studio space, professional gear, and production assistance. In addition to technical assistance, by hosting galas, workshops, and online panels, they persist in transforming the conversation from simple visibility to genuine power and equity for Black trans femmes and queers in the arts. So the next foundation is Ni Santas, founded by Andy Zoch, Trinley Garcia-Dad, and Joan Zamora, based in LA. The main objective of the collective is to establish a secure, non-judgmental environment where new artists can cultivate their skills and experience a feeling of community. Through fostering a sisterhood through skill sharing, Ni Santas seeks to enable its members to regain access to spaces and resources that have traditionally been systemically inaccessible to them. They see their artistic practice as a means for political and social justice. employing it to express lived experiences frequently overlooked by the mainstream art history. These workshops aim to encourage artistic discovery while also promoting connections among attendees, particularly focusing on BIPOC women and gender diverse individuals. Our last collective is the AEWA, founded by Jasmine Phillips in Chicago. This work would not be well-rounded without mentioning the artistic and philanthropic achievements of the African American Women's Collective, Women Artists Collective, a professional network focused on empowering, linking, and honoring Black women in every creative field. The collective establishes dedicated spaces for Black women to excel and share their distinct narratives by concentrating on visual arts, performance, literature, and design. The network acts as a sisterhood and promotes each person's potential, offering emotional backing and tangible chances for collaborated efforts in social justice. In conclusion, contemporary intersectional women's artist collectives organized artistry in the face of oppression will continue to highlight, uplift, and educate others about those exhibition collectives and creatives who work tirelessly to pave the way for other marginalized artists in the name of a more equitable and just art world. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Olivia Jones and I'm a graduating senior art history major from Maryland, and this is my thesis, Exploring the Power of Healing Through Art. So my initial hypothesis was that when art is available, then patients in the community will have the opportunity to increase their wellness and through interaction and their own expectations to heal. My thesis statement is that when exploring the power of healing through art, it aims to examine the use of art in physical, mental, and emotional healing spaces in both medical and community environments. So a little bit of background. Art is the outcome of creativity and skill to embody feeling, beauty, and conceptual ideas, whereas healing is the ongoing restoration of becoming or making someone well again from mental, emotional, or physical pain. Art and medicine have been intertwined in ways that support healing in many forms. The impact of art in healthcare has been analyzed through the lens of medical professionals, but I seek to incorporate my own experiences into the discourse as a long-term patient and providing it with my firsthand perspective into its effectiveness. Methodology. Through auto theory, I reference my 20 years of consistent inpatient and ambulatory experience to connect how art helps people heal and overcomes difficult situations. I also conducted interviews with art therapists, curators, and artists whose work promote healing. And then I also reviewed secondary sources like medical libraries, medical blogs, and books. Okay, chapter 1. Not having a sense of comfort in an inpatient healthcare space can be isolating. However, having creative outlets provides a healthy coping mechanism to express emotions and manage stress, trauma, and mental, emotional, and physical pain. In chapter 1, I utilized Children's National Hospital as my case study. This hospital was founded in 1870 as a modest 12-bed hospital, but has expanded into a 323-bed hospital that is the exclusive provider for pediatric health care in the DC region, performing over 17,000 surgeries annually, and is ranked the #1 hospital in the Mid-Atlantic region. So, the first two people that I interviewed were Dr. Elva Anderson and VJ Hyde. Dr. Anderson explained that art therapy is a complementary and necessary approach because not all children are verbal. She explained that pediatric patients may be more expressive through drawing or painting than speaking about their experiences. Art releases and synthesizes suppressed emotions to present well-being to nurses and doctors. Mr. Hyde explained that music taps straight into the emotions by neurologically impacting different parts of the brain. The brain repairs itself through neuroplasticity, which is the ability to change, reorganize, and grow new neural networks. So when music plays, neuroplasticity is charged and music pushes the process forward to heal. The next person that I interviewed was Gregory Scott. He described that curated art throughout the hospital makes environments more welcoming and visually appealing and compassionate for patients, families, and staff alike. He intentionally curates rotating exhibits so patients and their families can have something to constantly look forward to. He describes the importance of art as art helps patients feel seen as individuals rather than cases, supporting dignity and identity. It also offers moments of choice, reflection, and personal connection during treatment. So this is some of the art that he has exhibited or curated in the hospital. I then interviewed Catherine Brown and Anna McDougall, the studio media program manager and specialist at Seacrest Studios. This institution is a broadcast center across many children's hospitals that supply opportunities for engagement and entertainment throughout the country. So some of their programming includes a morning show. So patients can call directly into this radio station, or they can physically come in. They do healthy humor, bingo, requesting a song. And Anna and Catherine said that when children are hospitalized, they often lose autonomy because the focus is strictly on their health. They described the role of digital engagement in the healing process through the confidence that empowers patients when they participate in the studio activities or tell their story, which alleviates their fears and stress. To provide sort of an adult perspective, I'm talking about the Alaska Native Medical Center. This institution provides a blueprint for how Indigenous cultures and lifestyles are incorporated into healing. This institution employs or utilizes traditional materials such as textures, talking circles, a healing clinic, wood and shells throughout their museum. And the lesson that can be learned from this unique facility is that healing is tied to physical, emotional, and spiritual identity, and that all draws from community engagement and outreach. The inclusion of local communities in this institution fosters trust and builds rapport in healthcare spaces. Sorry. So this is some of their healing circle. And then this is some more of their art in their institution. And then chapter 2. Art also fosters a sense of self-expression and interconnectedness that helps communities overcome feelings of isolation to unite in addressing a shared purpose or goal. This chapter aims to examine how artists utilize their work to promote individual and collective healing. So to talk a little bit about myself, when I was 6 months old, I was diagnosed with cardiomyopathy, meaning that my heart was enlarged. And I spent over 101 days at Children's National Hospital waiting for a new heart that I eventually received when I was 17 months old. And I recently celebrated my 20th anniversary. And art has given me courage and healed my inner scars and fears from a lifetime of procedures and treatments, specifically the Beads of Courage program, which has been embedded into my care plan. So this program, it was developed in 2005 by nurse Jean Griffin. So after each medical intervention, participants receive a different colored bead for each procedure to honor the courage exhibited during treatment, whether they're inpatient or outpatient. For example, the rainbow bead represents physical therapy, the blue bead represents doctor's appointments, red bead, blood transfusions, and black bead is blood drawn. So the byproduct of this program is that the bead strands created by each patient, which tells their unique story of courage and healing. To transition a bit, the George Floyd Memorial in Minneapolis was the catalyst for the Black Lives Matter movement, which sparked protests and calls to change policing in minority communities. This memorial serves as a healing space for the community and those who visit the site. Following Floyd's death, the DC community began posting homemade signs and artwork along a makeshift construction barrier near Lafayette Park. This eventually transpired into Mayor Muriel Bowser commissioning the Black Lives Matter Plaza, which became a healing sanctuary for the community to gather. From a community perspective, art can also cultivate a sense of interconnectedness amongst individuals, facilitating community action and activism toward a common objective. Although Minneapolis residents initiated the resistance movement following the murder of George Floyd, their intense pressure radiated to other major cities like DC. And then the last person I interviewed was Wandy Austin. She's a performance artist and humanitarian who uses her musical talent to empower vulnerable populations with adequate skills to combat oppression and poverty to heal communities abroad through her organization One Change. Her work with young children using music as the medium to communicate hope and resilience has shaped social justice movements and provided healing and connection for their communities, providing a foundation for them to rebuild and find strength in their collective goals to support each other. And then Ted Mayer is a Los Angeles-based artist, curator, and patient advocate who uses art to promote empathy through storytelling and improve physical patient communication. His ongoing Scarred for Life Monoprints of Human Scars project challenges harmful beauty standards by helping patients redefine their bodily scars from surgeries, trauma, and disfigurement into stories about resilience and healing. He allows his models to tell their own stories of courage and resilience, rather than solely photographing them as anonymous individuals who have permanent reminders of physically traumatic experiences. So to dive into one of these pieces, into umbilical hernia repair, Christine and Woodson, the model here, she had a procedure to repair an umbilical hernia, but doctors accidentally punctured her small intestine and discovered a hematoma instead. Following the surgery, she felt a sense of shame and struggled with learning to love her body and found it easier to joke about being an appetizer for a shark rather than disclosing the true backstory of her scars. Her participation in Ted Mayer's project gave her the confidence to celebrate life and healing, to celebrate healing and acceptance of her body in its current form, and to share her scars with the world, proving that even misfigured bodies can be perceived as healed and whole. And then, people are more than the diseases they present with, and communities are more than their socioeconomic shortcomings. Art in its many forms is a powerful tool for helping individuals and communities heal, whether it's music, art therapy, or curated art, distracting and helping patients relax and release stress, to art transcending cultures and continents to galvanize a community to take action. Whether healing is an identifier that life has more to offer or an admission that it has given all that it can be afforded, art is critical to absorbing the acceptance of the next step. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Candice Lawrie. I am an art history major and graduating senior from Clark Atlanta University. Thank you. 19 days. Who's counting? All right. This presentation is based on my thesis, Process as Power, Adding Value to the Black Art Aesthetic. My interest in the art field is preservation and record keeping of Black art. I see myself as a Black art steward and have grown from a volunteer to an intern at Clark Atlanta University Art Museum, which has really allowed me to hone in on my passion. So I just want to thank everyone who's been a part of that journey. Art history scholarship has always been about deciding what counts as art and what doesn't. But those decisions didn't include everyone. Black artists and materials they use were pretty much left out. What I'm really interested in is how an artist's process and medium can hold power in Black art and how things that were once overlooked are now taken seriously. So I focus on these three artists, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Cara Elizabeth Walker, and Toyin Oji Odutola. Say that 5 times fast. Okay. Each of them work in a medium that wasn't always respected as fine art, specifically graffiti, silhouettes, and drawing, respectively. What I argue is that they don't just use these forms, they actually elevate them and expand what we understand as the Black aesthetic. So their process isn't secondary, it's just as important as the work they create. This project is structured in a way that builds both historically and conceptually. I start with my introduction, where I move toward defining contemporary Black aesthetic, the canon, and canon revision theory. So before I go any further, just in case you guys don't know, I'll just run over those terms really quickly. The art canon basically refers to the group of artists and artworks that have been historically accepted. Think Manet, Picasso, etc. And they're basically traditionally centered European artists and perspectives. Next is canon revision theory. This is the idea that the canon isn't fixed. It can and should be challenged, expanded, and reworked to include artists, materials, and histories that were previously excluded. And finally, the Black aesthetic. This is a cultural and artistic framework that centers Black identity, experience, and expression. In my project, I rely primarily on Larry Neal's theory of the Black aesthetic, where he argues for art that speaks directly to Black life while rejecting the Western standards that have historically excluded Black artists. My intro concludes with a look at artists like Hale Woodruff and Lois Mailou Jones, along with collectives like Afro Cobra. I also bring in Kerry James Marshall and his idea of a restorative canon to help frame how Black artists are not just participating in art history, but actively reshaping it. In chapter 1, I focus on Jean-Michel Basquiat and his movement from the streets into the gallery space. Here, I look at how graffiti, text, and improvisation challenge traditional ideas of fine art and value. In chapter 2, I turn to Cara Walker and her use of silhouettes to expose and confront American history. This chapter focuses on how she uses a traditionally decorative medium to address violence, power, and historical memory. In chapter 3, I examine Toyin Oji Odutola and her use of drawing to construct identity and narrative. She transforms drawing from something seen as preparatory into a fully realized and complex art form. And finally, chapter 4, I move beyond representation to think about a new hierarchy through the Black lens. This is where I bring everything together and argue that these artists are not just adding to the canon, they are actively redefining value, process, and power within it. I also discuss the new wave of Black art and artists and what that means for the Black aesthetic. Okay, so my research pulls from a mix of art history texts, children's books, exhibition catalogs, and artist statements through interviews, YouTube University. I also look at how these works are presented in museums and galleries because how they are displayed plays a role in how value is assigned. And I pay attention to the art market, auction sales, collector interest, and institutional recognition because that shows how these works are being received in real time. Something that has been extremely important to me in this project is accessibility. A lot of my research points to the fact that Black artists and communities were historically denied access to these spaces and conversations. I am intentional in my choice of vocabulary today because it would undermine my focus to access. It would undermine my focus on access to present this in a way that's hard to follow or connect. And I wanted my mom to get it and enjoy. So we moved to Hale Woodruff. And with Hale Woodruff, I start thinking through how the canon has been constructed over time. Woodruff was one of the first Black artists to seriously engage both African and European traditions in an academic way. He studied abroad, but stayed deeply connected to Black history and the Black experience. His work, especially in murals and teachings, show an early effort to insert Black narratives into spaces that had traditionally excluded them. So he's not just making art, he's also shaping how art is taught and understood. That's important for my thesis because it shows this push to expand the canon didn't just start with contemporary artists. This is legacy work here. Woodruff helps lay the groundwork for how Black artists move from being excluded to actively redefining the system itself. And that becomes the foundation for everything that follows in my project. With Lois Mailou Jones, we continue to see a connection to African heritage and global identity. Her work reminds us that Black art isn't isolated. It's part of a much larger cultural history. I'm sorry, y'all, give me 1 second. Okay. So before getting into the artist, I had to ask what actually defines the Black aesthetic, because it's not just a style. It comes out of specific historic and cultural moments like the Harlem Renaissance and Afro-Cobra. Each of these moments responded to a lack of representation and a need for self-definition. So the Black aesthetic becomes a way for Black artists to take control over how they are seen and understood instead of being defined through a Eurocentric lens. These movements often emphasize bold color, recognizable imagery, and direct messaging, all things that could reach their target Black community, not just the elite institutions. So what's really at stake here is power, who gets to define what counts as art and what gets preserved and what gets valued. With Kerry James Marshall, we get to this idea of a restorative canon. And what that means is he's just not adding to Black figures into art history, he's actively correcting the absence of them. A lot of traditional Western art history centers whiteness as the default, both in subject matter and who gets to be remembered. Marshall pushes back against that by placing Black figures at the center of his work, not as background or exception, but as focus. He's also intentional about using deep, dark tones for Black skin, which challenges the way Blackness has often been softened or made acceptable in art. So visually and conceptually, he's restoring presence where there was once absence. And this idea is important for my thesis because it sets up how later artists like Basquiat, Walker, and Odutola don't just enter the canon, but they actually reshape it in on their own terms. I further go into Marshall's practice by referencing works like De Style, which he directly references the European movement to still. Notable artists in this practice were focused on order, balance, purity, using grids, straight lines, etc. But that universal language was not, well, the intention was for it to be a universal language, but it always excluded us, again. So what Marshall does is take that same visual structure, the grid, the flatness, and completely shifts the content. Instead of abstraction, he fills the space with Black figures and Black cultural references. So he's not rejecting the canon, he's kind of using its own visual language against it. Here's another example. I'm gonna skip forward in the interest of time, but he does reference back to the ambassadors and Las Meninas in this portrait, this piece, School of Beauty, School of Culture. Moving on. So this is the meat of my thesis. Okay. So Jean-Michel Basquiat. To really understand his work, you have to start with his foundation. His upbringing, influences, and early experiences all play a role in how he challenges traditional ideas of art. Yeah, Basquiat in the street. So red kings, those crowns and bold colors become symbols of power, but they're also a kind of reclamation. Because historically Black figures have been excluded, these ideas of royalty and authority become what he focuses on. So when Basquiat pastes crowns on his figures, he's not just decorating them, he's asserting their value in a space that has denied it. Moving on to equals pi, you see his use of text and symbols layered together. The fact that this work has ended up in the Tiffany flagship store in New York City shows how something from the street moves into elite spaces, as well as more recent collaborations with Coach and Urban Outfitters that shifts part of the art value itself. With Carol Walker, we move into silhouettes, a medium traditionally seen as delicate or decorative. But Walker completely flips that. She uses this simple, flat, Black style to depict scenes of slavery, violence, and the power in the antebellum South, excuse me. At first glance, the work can feel almost playful, but the longer you look, the more disturbing it becomes. Figures overlap, interact, and suggest moments of domination and exploitation. But there are no facial features. You're forced to read the story through body language, which makes it even more intense. She also uses extremely long, almost exaggerated titles, which read like narratives themselves. They guide the viewer, but also add a layer of irony and critique, almost mimicking the dramatic language used to romanticize that history. Obviously, think Gone with the Wind, that sort of such situation. She takes a lesser medium and turns it into something confrontational, using beauty and simplicity to pull you into something much more uncomfortable. Oh, okay, thank you. Also, her installations surround the viewer. She fills entire walls with silhouettes, placing you inside the scene. This immersive approach recalls cycloramas and panoramas, made popular in the late 1800s, but instead of entertainment, she uses it to confront history, violence, and power close up. And this is just a detail from that image before. The imagery is exaggerated and disturbing on purpose. She uses stereotypes like the Pickaninny figure to expose how these images were originally used. So she's not trying to repeat the stereotypes, she's just forcing us to confront the original use of it, the stereotype. So in talking about Carol Walker silhouettes, it's worth noting Moses Williams. He worked in the late 18th and 19th century with silhouettes when that was basically one of the limited pieces of medium that Black people had access to. It doesn't require much skills or tools, just scissors and paper, and that was what we had access to. So at the same time, silhouettes were seen as decorative and secondary. That's what makes Walker's work powerful. She takes that same medium and pushes it into something confrontational, raunchy, and conceptually heavy. Miss Toyin Odutola. So with Toyin's drawings, the drawing actually is the focus. Instead of being preparatory, it becomes the finished work. Her layering and mark making build identity in a real intentional way. She also creates entire fictional worlds. Her figures feel personal, but they also speak to a larger idea about identity and power. She's expanding how Blackness can be represented. And in this quote, I just wanted to share, share that she talks about wanting to show Blackness as something full of light from within, not in comparison to anything else, but as complete and on its own. That's a big shift in how Black identity is often portrayed. This piece really leans into vulnerability and humanity. It's about recognizing the person beyond any label or circumstance. That emotional depth is part of the value she adds. What she says is, and this is her talking to the painting, I told him upon finishing the portrait, look at you in this vulnerable state. You're golden, you're beautiful, you're enough. I respect you and your sentence, but before you put on that sentence, this person exists and that person is you. It's beautiful And I wanted him to know that. Okay. In conclusion, thank you, Father. So, I'm thinking about the conclusion. I wanted to focus on how value is being redefined across a few different levels. First, there's financial value. We see that through market prices, auctions, and institutional recognition. For example, Basquiat's equals Pi being on display at Tiffany, as I mentioned, and the recent collaborations with Coach and Urban Outfitters. There's social and artistic value, where there's a growing appreciation for the Black aesthetic as fine art, especially in works like Toyin and Odutola's drawings. Processes and materials that were once considered lesser, like a Sharpie, are now being taken seriously and respected. And finally, there's future and historical value. This isn't just about adding Black artists to the canon, it's about fully integrating them. So the canon isn't just so the canon itself begins to shift rather than staying the same and just making room for us. And that shift is really what these artists are contributing to. They're not just participating in art history, they're actively reshaping it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I actually had a closing statement. I'm sorry, y'all. I skipped it. At its core, this thesis is about visibility, power, and who has the authority to define what art is. By looking at these three artists, alongside with their predecessors, like Woodruff, Jones, and Marshall, we can see how the Black aesthetic doesn't simply challenge the canon. Boom. That was it.
Thank you very much, all of our presenters. I had a front row seat and I enjoyed listening to you and seeing how your ideas have grown from September of 2025. So I applaud you. Now I'd like to ask the four speakers to join me on stage. Actually, I'm gonna stand right here. If you go to the table. Yeah, the stage. For the camera. I need to be on stage for the camera.
No, we can see it.
Oh, wait, there you go. You want to stand at the podium? Thank you. We're now entertaining questions from the audience.
Question. So I'm familiar with Candice, and so, but this is a question for the entire panel because I'm really curious. So Candice was working I work at Clark University Art Museum, so you've been immersed in this wide history of Black art, and I'm sure that yes, I can. This is a question for Candice, but for anyone else on the panel. Candice, I know that you have been in the Clark University Art Museum for a couple of years now, and so I'm sure your exposure to our collection has informed your work. So can you talk about, has that informed your work and your the thesis that you've done, and anyone else on the panel, what experiences have you done in undergrad that really informed your theoretical practice and your thesis?
Okay. Hello, may y'all hear me? Okay, well, I don't think that's loud enough. So being submerged in that work, last year we did that research project where we were looking into Hale Woodruff, and I drew back to that. I just think there's a comfort more than anything being inspired by being in the space. So being able to be in the basement and for hours with our collection with actual works from Hale Woodruff and Lois Mailou Jones, it makes me feel connected in a way that I want to respect the information and present it in a way that we can all appreciate. So absolutely, it has influenced my practice, and appreciation. Thank you.
Any other panelists that would like to respond?
Yes, so during the summer of 2025, I had like the incredible experience of interning abroad with Guest Artist Space Foundation in Lagos, Nigeria. There she was. And I guess being a part of the Amora Arts Intensive really influenced my sort of focus on artist collectives. It was a co-ed collective, but being able to see sort of artists work with each other and give each other sort of either financial advice or just artistic advice in general, I really wanted to sort of hone in on that from a diasporic perspective, but also from a feminist perspective.
Hi, congratulations. What an accomplishment. Your presentations were fantastic, and I'm glad to hear of the research. I know you've just took a breath, but I'm curious. What do you imagine maybe the dream afterlife of your thesis? Are these artists or stories you'd like to continue to engage, to publish on, curate around, et cetera, et cetera?
So I feel like my research is very much ongoing because I feel like you've noticed that my work was historical, but also the latter half was very, very contemporary. I reached out to all of those collectives, none of them responded. But it's okay, I will find them and I will continue to question them because they still very much exist. And they're still very much practicing. But I also am trying to be really understanding about it because they are artists who also are managing collectives. I don't know if you guys remember, but Hank Willis Thomas recently came and did a talk with Morehouse, and he came late March or the beginning of April, very late March. He didn't respond to me until like 2 days ago to say like hi back. And it's very important to realize that these people are working professionals and are still actively engaging in those practices. But yeah, I would very much like to, reach out and continue to make this a publication because I am very much still interested in this research, but I also want to continue to interact with contemporary artists today.
I think I would definitely love to continue researching art and healing, not only like within myself, but maintaining the relationships I've built with all of my interviewers, especially as I transition from pediatric care to adult care.
Tell us more about that.
Oh, yes, okay, but like for me, okay, so like for me, like my thesis, I'm definitely interested in doing like more like research like on Avant-Garde as well as like how it's been and like how like neutralization has been occurring. In fact, I especially am curious what like especially am I interested in like doing a lot more research on it because there are more like avant-garde work out there that has had the work been retold, like recontextualized. So I feel as though with that topic being in mind, is something that needs to be like further discussed.
So doing my research, I realized if I didn't have anything else to do besides school, I would love to just do this. Being an older student and having like bills, it's really difficult to put your all into it the way the work deserves. If I had the opportunity, meaning if anybody would pay for me to go to grad school, I would definitely continue this research. Practicing this today, someone said something to me like, "Oh, so you ready for your master's?" And I was like, "What?" I guess if the material is something that's desired,
It is.
I welcome the challenge to expound on it. It's so easy to get down rabbit holes with research, and I was just like, "Oh, it's so much." But yeah, I definitely want to engage with it on a deeper level when time and money permits.
There is a microphone, to your right, and a stand if you'd like to, speak from there, or you don't have to, Anna. You have the mic.
I'm gonna do a sit down.
Okay, thank you.
First and foremost, amazing presentations, all very riveting, can be very, yes, absolutely. Can be very interested, loved all your topics, but my questions are really, well, I have a two-parter, but it's really directed for Daniel over there and Nina, of course. I loved how you guys really focused on women in your presentations, Daniel, especially with yours. My question to you was, you spoke a lot about the historical movement of the avant-garde as it relates to women's bodies. I thought that was super interesting. I wanted to see if there were any contemporary influences you got, because I noticed that Nina had a lot in hers. That was my first question. Well, I guess it's a three-part question. That was my first question.
Okay, question one.
Okay, yeah, question. Are there any contemporary influences as far as the avant-garde through women's bodies being used as a kind of form of resistance? That's my first one. Then my second one is, what made you, within avant-garde, there's so many different movements, what made you want to focus on performance art, which is usually not very, we don't talk about it as much. So that was very interesting. And then noticing that you and Nina had kind of like similar topics, how much cross-pollination was happening between you guys within the thesis class? How many of you guys shared your topics with each other and helped each other and did those things? I want to hear more of those stories. But yeah, that last question's for everybody. But yeah, Daniel, let me know.
Aaron, I appreciate that a lot.
Gotcha.
So like when it comes to being like inspired, I wouldn't really say that like I wouldn't like really say that like, I was like too inspired by a certain like time period or medium, but like I was like. But I would say that like when it comes to influence, I was mainly because because I was having this conversation with my friends and we were talking about how like women were oppressed like in our world like one of my favorite one of my favorite pieces like when it comes to when it comes to like this topic, it was by the Umbrella Girls. It was called what was called it was like how to become it was like called how to like become like woman artist, like I think his name.
Yeah.
Daniel, are you going to talk to us about the kitchen as well?
Definitely.
Yes.
Would that work? Like it like like list out like the ways to become a woman artist, but when you like actually like when you like actually like read it, it like lists out the like oppression that one faced during the time. So I will say that like the satire like played a role in that. It was like one of the works that we focused on that when we focused on last year during one courses. So well, yeah, yes. So definitely like a satire and like feminist art that played a role, and also my leadership at the kitchen that also played like there was like there's a huge impact that my time like at the kitchen like for my thesis. So one of the like main goals like of the when it comes to the kitchen, they were focusing like on avant-garde, like pushing the boundaries with art. And so so basically, I decided to like write my thesis like on it because again, like when it comes to like avant-garde, these like persistent like systems, they tend to be like overlooked. That was like that was like something that like, I was like inspired on. Like what was your like next question?
Oh, how would you guys like work together and weave together like with your different topics? Especially you and Nina being so close. Did you guys ever have conversations about what you were doing? But that's for all of you guys, of course. I want to hear from all.
To be honest, like not really. Like we didn't like because
You did encourage them.
yeah, she did. She did. We didn't like really like get like a chance to like to hear everyone's let everyone's like research. But I will say though, like when we like practice presentations, I will say that like I will say that like, I was like very impressed with with like what I saw. Because because we have to like remember like some of the topics that we are discussing like with these presentations like the community they tend to like not like pay attention to like marginalized groups. So I will say that we'll say that even though we didn't like, have a chance to discuss our ideas, yesterday's practice was definitely was definitely was like inspirational.
Thank you.
Yeah, kind of building off of what Daniel said, I didn't have like a thorough idea of what everyone was doing until everyone started practicing. But I will say that I feel like they do sort of go together because we touch on the same sort of materials. Like he references the Guerrilla Girls a lot, and I do too in my thesis, but I feel like his is a lot more sort of focused in on the actual practice of the individual artist, and mine's a little more broad. I mean, if I sat here and named everyone in these sentences, like because it's an open collective to which every artist can join, but I feel like they do sort of share the same sort of foundational methods and ideologies, so sort of deconstructing the blockages that marginalized peoples face in the art world.
Questions, I think We are going to move into our next section right now. The speakers will be available. Before we break, I just want to say, because I forgot at the beginning, the thesis is the capstone project for graduating seniors. It is their first foray, or their earliest foray, as emerging scholars. I'd also like to thank the Alice Walton Foundation for support of our program. We will now have a 10-minute break. You all can take your seats after. Did you want to say something?
Right, great, sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That's good. Thank you. How did it? Okay. Okay. Excited. I was bringing things down and trying to make it. Thank you. I'm excited. Thank you. I feel that. Shiny, you know, shiny. Oh, I did another graduating senior at Morehouse. PhD. After, thank you so much. I can't wait for you. I mean, no, I actually was shooting off in the room. Oh, I could just say. No, I waited for 5 years to yeah. For everything. Dry now. Like they were saying. Yeah. Oh, yes. You did it. Questions, you see you got 3 questions, you answer those? No, we couldn't answer all of them, we ran out of time. Okay, cool. Help them transition. Okay. Like you said, I told them, I was like, figure out.
We just had a delay with still downloading the presentation. We were able to.
If somebody didn't give you the presentation and earlier the. That would be good.
Hello, everyone. Return to your seats. We are beginning with our presentations again.
We have people pull it apart. That's why I say let's talk.
Oh,
Yeah, people pull it apart.
okay. You're welcome to return to your seats. We're starting with presentations again.
Yeah, Rachel was trying to flick her up there. More.
We're gonna go ahead and get started.
What do you want me to say? You said. Just text me. So.
Thank you, everyone, for your enthusiasm and your attention tonight. And I'm glad that we were able to enjoy a fellowship of friends along with our scholarship for the evening. This is part 2 of our presentation. And we'll have again 4 speakers. Amaya Loubeau is an art history major and a documentary film and theater and performance double minor. She will be attending Sotheby's Institute of Art in New York, and she will be pursuing her master's in art business. Maya Manley, class of 2026, Clark Atlanta University. She is taking a gap year and she is excited and deserves it because she's been working so hard. She's been in 3 of my classes. She finished, methods, thesis, and Black Pacific in the writing intensive, yeah. She's had a lot to do this semester. She's taken a gap year, but she is this year's Art Pace Curatorial Fellow. And the 2026 summer for Faith Ringgold's Anyone Can Fly Foundation. We will also have a presentation by Savannah Woodson. She is an art history major at Spelman. Upon graduation, she'll be spending the year in St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, as she was offered a position working at the Art Explorium, an art studio and a community event space, before returning back to the States to pursue an MFA in painting and an MA in arts education with an interest in a PhD program. And her goal is to fortify her commitment to the artistic and cultural community and enhance her credibility. It's already there. Enhance her credibility to be a practicing artist and educator. We also have Asada Young. She is an art history major and an economics minor. And it has been really exciting for me this year because 3 of the students were in the early college program. So I first met them when they were either a rising junior or a rising senior in high school. So this is a full circle moment for me. Asada is still undecided about her options, but she's exploring careers in the art and art business fields. And again, she's an art history major and economics minor. Now Amaya will give her presentation.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Amaya Loubeau. I am a senior art history major with a double minor in documentary filmmaking and theater and performance from Atlanta, Georgia. And today I'll be presenting my thesis titled From Black Venus to Video Vixen, Negotiating Black Female Sexuality and Visibility in Art and Music Videos. So to begin, I wanted to talk about how this project examines how Black women's bodies and sexuality are seen, controlled, and interpreted across both historical, contemporary visual culture within music and art spaces, tracing from the legacy of the Hottentot Venus to contemporary visual and performing arts. Before I begin, I want to briefly acknowledge that this presentation includes some expose visuals and music titles that contain strong language. I'm also aware that as a Spelman student, I'm speaking within an institutional context that holds a particular expectation around representation and respectability, and that the topic of Black women's sexuality can be received in different ways. However, I believe it's important to engage these conversations critically. This project approaches these images not simply as entertainment, but as sites of analysis, where questions of both body image, agency, and representation are actively being negotiated. So throughout my thesis argument, my central question is, can Black women ever truly control how their bodies are seen in visual culture? Through my visual artist analysis of Renee Cox and Tisha Balashel, and my performing artists Megan Thee Stallion and Beyonce, I dissect how these artists move through these spaces while having the double bind of agency and objectification over their heads. To break down how my thesis is situated, I have it broken down into 4 chapters, excluding the introduction and conclusion. So my introduction focuses on my framework, and then my chapter 1 focuses on the historical framework of the visual grammar and the construction of the Black female body. Chapter 2 focuses on the spectacle of Black women in hip hop visual culture. Chapter 3 focuses on framing the body through control, respectability, and the gaze through a case study of Renee Cox and Beyonce. And then chapter 4 focuses on excess and flesh, performing and constructing the Black female body through a case study in comparison with Tisha Balashel and Megan Thee Stallion. To begin, I also want to talk just a little bit about breaking down my methodologies. So my methodologies for doing this presentation were my visual analysis, Black feminist theory, historical archival analysis, visual culture, visual culture and media analysis, and comparative analysis. So I focus mostly on Black feminist theory through the lens of Horton T. Spillers, through his idea of the flesh, which I will explain in a second, and then the historical archival analysis of slavery, scientific racism, and spectacle within the visual media. And then I compare and contrast this with popular media through music videos, and then the idea of how this actually transcribes within the future tense and contemporary tense. So the key terms that I want you guys to keep in mind throughout my presentation is the idea of flesh, fragmentation, and excess. Flesh, I built upon Horton T. Spiller's idea of what flesh is contemporaries as through the body. So the body is reduced to material, meaning it is not imposed but not self-defined, meaning that we lose the humanity and what it means for our bodies. Fragmentation is broken down in how the body is seen in parts rather than being seen as a whole. What does it mean is specifically for the Black female bodies that we'll be looking at the buttocks and the hips and those spaces or regions of analysis. Excess as well, an exaggeration of features historically marked as sexually deviant in Black female bodies as well. And in the tinges that we explore is the control and authorship, the gaze, and respectability of how we look at these bodies. So chapter 1 focuses on the foundation of visual grammar of the Black female body. This project begins with what I call a visual grammar of what Black female sexuality represents within a historic lens. Black women's bodies were constructed through systems of slavery, science, and entertainment as objects of spectacle, consumption, and control. This is rooted in the colonial archive of Black women being constructed through the idea of slavery through property, science as body as data and racial archetype through pseudoscience, and entertainment as a spectacle and display. Through this, we see that it is produced a visual script where Black women are seen as hypervisible, dehumanized, and defined externally as their flesh rather than as a person. As you see on the screen are two examples of visual grammar that we see within the canon of Black female bodies in history. One of Delia, a daguerreotype of an enslaved woman, and then of a engraving of Black women on a plaque at the slave market. The legacy of Hottentot Venus played a central part around my case study and thesis. I wanted to talk about her legacy as the Hottentot Venus and what does that mean and how it connects back to the visual grammar and sexuality of Black female bodies. So in case you don't know who Satarji Bartman is, she is a woman, a South African woman that was brought into Europe and was enslaved during the early 1800s and displayed as both a spectacle and scientific object. And her body became evidence through exaggeration as a result of her large buttocks. After body and genitalia were dissected when she died, it proved also that her othering and sexual deviancy was tied back to who she was as a frame in her flesh. What matters is that her image established a way of seeing Black women as hypervisible bodies, but absent subjects. We're left with a visual grammar that defined her in another way, and that logic doesn't disappear, but it continues to articulate in different ways. As a result, I moved into what I call my chapter 2, what it shows up in the entertainment and performance. This visual system does not disappear, as I just said, but it revolves around performance and media. Black female bodies continue to be hypervisible, but in their agency, they are trying to figure out how to convert through this double bind of objectification, but also having agency over their body. A prominent figure of this would be Josephine Baker, who became a pioneer in showing that this bind within entertainment, famously for her role as Fatou in La Joie de Foi, a picture to the right in the banana skirt. I also talked about too in this chapter what it has shown up in contemporary times. So that has shown up as the video Vixen Girl. Another key concept that plays in how music and performance shows up for how we are hypervisible, fragmented, and often interchangeable, as our bodies in these cases and roles are seen as supports for male power by remaining as an object of display. Again, we are visible but not fully a subject, and more of a status of object as well as a wealth rather than actually as a person. This can be seen in the still from clip from the music video, Dr. Dre's Still Dre, where we see that the women are only being seen as objects rather than as the people of their soul. This also translated later on into what we see as the contemporary Black female artists, which shows up in pioneers like Little Kim, as we see in the Notorious Kim album cover that's pictured on the left. So in exploring these tensions, I wanted to see how do we continue to show our self-authorship and actually move through these spaces. So my chapter 3 talks about how we get through control, respectability, and the gaze through the lens of Beyonce and Renee Cox, two pioneers within their industries. Beyonce has a very big iconography for Black female bodies in the visual culture and pop culture, and Renee Cox, a very big practicing photographer who focuses on female empowerment. So with them putting them in pairing, I noticed that there was within their tension that they actually dismantle and work to negotiate their visibility within institutions. For example, with Your Mama's Last Supper, Renee Cox works to rewrite Western and spiritual canon, asserting Black female body as divine authority rather than moving away from what we see as sexual deviancy. She also confronts institutional exclusion from within throughout this way, through in spirituality and Catholicism, as well as in Western museums. In her work Ape Shit with her husband, Jay-Z, Beyonce places Black bodies inside elite art institutions such as the Louvre, which shifts the Black body as the central of the museum rather than it being a backdrop. A lot of the time when we look inside of these museums, we do not see visibility of our presence. And actually, notably in the Louvre, the only body that you will ever see is the portrait of La Negresse, one Black woman that has been in there, and she is in servitude. And looking outside of their practice and individually, I also wanted to talk about how they do end up catering to their sexuality and also showing their iconography with it. How did they turn their bodies into visibility and negotiation within these spaces? And so I looked at Partition by Beyonce in 2013, which shows that she is very intentional about how she is showing her body through the contrast of choreography, camera framing, editing, lighting. Her visibility is controlled and measured not with excessiveness, but operating within the framework of respectability and luxury that is put within her iconography. Her body becomes a pattern that's repeated and meditated rather than being too excessive. And even in her excessive showing of her body is never anything that's too visible. Also looking into the work of Renee Cox again, the Hot Top Venus directly represents Sartar J. Bartman's legacy, but this time instead of it being in a sense of not being able to control the gaze in which her body is looked at, Renee Cox is actually controlling the authority of how her body is looked at. She is playing into the fetishization through the prosthetics that we see on her body, and she's refusing fragmentation and daring her audience to look at her body and take it in and actually see her as a human rather than as a spectacle. On the other side, in my chapter 4, I wanted to also see what it would look like when we actually put Black female sexuality in our bodies in excess. So in this sense, I wanted to see it in the sense of performing and constructing excess. Megan Thee Stallion is our prime example of what it means to perform excess, while constructing excess is through institution itself. So in these senses, their bodies are central, visible, and self-directed. Their sexuality is formed through their movement, but also in their fragmentation of their works. They're reclaiming what it means for excess within their curves and their buttocks, and excess becomes a performance of pleasure and confidence and control. So my first example I pulled within this chapter was on Megan Thee Stallion's body. As you can see in a clip of the music video, she has a rhythm that is also an affirmation. There is also costuming that is seen in more of a BDSM costuming of her body. However, in this sense, how the Black female body has always been seen in a fetishization, she's using it to also allude to the excess that controls the embodiment, control, and self-authorship of her body, but is seeing it in a way of providing joy, pleasure, and self-definition rather in fetishization or objectification. However, this music video did come out in 2020, and she ended up coming out with another music video in 2021 called Thought Shit, which ended up being a critique of how a critique of the criticism she did receive through body. So within this, she actually uses it as a satirical method of showing her body and being very excessive in her movement within her gyration, her fragmentation of twerking through performance and critique, and then also in showing her place in institutions such as courtrooms and offices and streets. She's exposing the hypocrisy of the gaze of having desire in private but condemnation in public of her body, and is using it to actually disrupt rather than passively let her body be consumed. On the other side of constructing excess, we have Tishabala self, whose practice is all fragmented around the body being stitched, fragmented, and assembled through materials and acrylic paint. She rejects coherence, no natural or unified body, and exposes how the body is historically constructed. Like I said, she uses fabric, paint, collage to show the disruption, but also layering the identity. None of the bodies that you see on the screen or in her works are ever of one person. They are of multiple people she puts together, therefore never actually having a identity claim to it, but is controlling how her body can be interpreted. This is example of her work, The Candy. And then another one of her works, Sapphire in 2015, actually is a direct conversation with what we see in Hottentot Venus, especially in the sense of compared to, and I'm just gonna go back real quick. You see in Candy, there's more of a assertion of what the face looks like in more detail. However, compared to this one, she leaves the face more undefined and is no unified figure. She's playing into the exaggeration of proportion in the reference to the historical distortion of what the Black female looks like in iconography. She exposes the constructed identity in the face fragment and disrupts the stable subjectivehood. So there's no way, again, of telling who this person is, but knowing that it's speaking into the millions of women around. Her body exists in tension and balance and becoming, playing into that contrast of what it means to be consumed, but also fragmented at the same time. So in my conclusion, I will say when I started this journey, I thought that my methodology would be that this would be showing empowerment. However, like I said, I know that there's different perspectives in how we do articulate how our Black sexuality shows up and our bodies do in these spaces. But I noticed that its visibility is a double-edged condition. The Black female body and visibility is historically constructed in a framework that even if we do not know it, we are subconsciously living within that ourselves too. We impose it on ourselves as well as we let society impose it on ourselves, which actually it creates a reclamation that we are trying to actually create and get back. So in conclusion, there is not really any, there is reclamation, but it is within its own framework and within its own hold. Reclamation does not fail, but it cannot fully hold on its own. It always will play off of the tension that we see within context, circulation, the gaze, and control. Because as I said, there is no way of actually having a fixed perspective, but only in negotiating how we actually articulate these visual grammars. Thank you.
Amaya.
Good evening. I am Amaya Manley, an Atlanta native and graduating senior in Art History Curatorial Studies attending Clark Atlanta University. Today, I will be discussing the aesthetics of protest through two case studies of printmaking and documentary photography. Why investigate this? This topic became of interest to me because of a trend I was noticing over the last few years as the public protested recent administrations and their policies. These two phenomena I'm calling armchair activism and the memification of protest. Because of this, I began wondering how generations previous to the internet and the advent of social media were able to sustain movements for decades across international boundaries and ideological terrains. And even more so, is protest still effective? In the 1960s present excellent case studies for how countercultural marginalized groups created their own visual languages and media to support their desired social political pursuits. So how am I investigating this? My research approach can best be characterized in 3 ways that telescope into each case study to understand the formal qualities of the artwork through visual analysis, social history, and iconography. These initial encounters with the work were framed by the Hegelian understanding of art history where form and content interact harmoniously to express an idea. However, my investigation and case studies diverge from Hegel as there is no rigid systemic approach or progression to creating countercultural media. I utilize these case studies to push against Hegelian understandings of art, which systemically relegate art produced by non-European communities to symbolic low art, where forms and content are seen as inadequate for expression. Even further, Hegel's understanding of art as techne or skills, severs artistic production from its social, political, cultural, and economic contexts. Intersectional and iconographical analysis were essential to my understanding of each artwork within my thesis. I utilized qualitative methods to interact with my source material to more equitably discuss marginalized communities. Linda Huey Smith's decolonizing methodologies was of major import to this process, specifically the methods of storytelling, envisioning, intervening, and creating. I argue that not only are these methods necessary to discuss this topic, but to be an effective aesthetic agent. These methods are utilized by both my case studies and inform an activist aesthetic and activist art practice. Lastly, in my discussion of effective process aesthetics, I wanted to emphasize the significance of small d democratic, meaning the values which comprise democracy like access, equality, cost, agency, and self-determination. Because of this, I utilized open access archival materials that were not behind paywalls or only available through institutional resources and databases to make the point through my research process that it does not require immense capital or resources to conduct research or to adequately develop the Black art canon. So what is an aesthetic and what does this mean? An aesthetic is essentially a set of conventions that govern a style, or so like think cottagecore or modern, contemporary. So what is my argument? For the purposes of dissecting the aesthetics of protest, we're discussing the mobilization of affect through visual language and style. That is the aesthetic experience of the artwork by both the viewer and the artist. Emory Douglas and Ernest Cole have intentional activist artist practices that deploy imagery, symbols, and text viscerally capitalizing off the shared solidarities and knowledges of oppressed communities that they represent in our product. These create their own revolutionary countercultural visual languages. These languages serve to inform and embolden activisms and interior community engagement, circumventing hegemonic media and political systems that stifle and limit the political and socioeconomic agency of marginalized groups. The dissemination and creation of the media through the use of print and photography are democratic, cost-effective, and accessible, read user-friendly processes. Both the production process and the product can be psychologically and socially effective. And affect, like I said, means the intentional emotional effect between viewer and artist. Because of this, making image production is an effective political process uniting marginalized peoples across physical, economic, and social boundaries. So what does this mean? Protest is a function of democracy or an operation of democratic power. The democratic public performs its existence through resistance. If protest constitutes the people, the aesthetics of protest rupture the conventions of politics. A protest aesthetic reveals democracy is constituted through an interplay of performance, images, and tech, and is politically engaged. If the goal of democracy is to provide everyone or most with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, art creates the space where that is possible. This is the decolonial creating and envisioning that I'm talking about. Counter-hegemonic image making is an effective political process. Simply, the aesthetics of protests in my research operate through democratic, cost-effective, accessible, discrete material means to control representation, narrative, provide creative and physical freedom, and disseminate countercultural messaging, demonstrating through these bodies of work that art is an effective and effective communicator. So chapter 1 is about Emory Douglas, Minister of Culture. So Emory Douglas, church ministers orchestrate atmospheres with their words and the support of choirs, ushering in the spirit to their congregations. Emory Douglas does this with his art. Douglas developed a visual style informed by his commercial advertising design background which unified photo montage, collage, and drawing to mimic woodcut printing. Douglas made sure to utilize low-cost resources and methods to repurpose artwork not only to maximize affect, but to ensure the newspaper could financially sustain itself. As the newspaper gained popularity following its inaugural year in 1967, the newspaper was able to begin offset printing. Compositional elements like text, image, colors, and texture work together to be visually stimulating. The language is imbued with social meaning. The Black Panther Party newspaper has a clear organizational and ideological strategy. The 10-point Black Panther Party platform, which Douglas accents with his cartoon images and is published in every single issue of the newspaper beginning in 1967. An example of intervening. Here we see the icons of the rat and the pig, which stand in for avaricious businessmen, capitalists, and racist agents of the imperial state, an example of storytelling. Douglas depicts Black people of all ages, yes, even children, as armed, active, self-determinate people. However, I cannot say that the Black Panther Party did this as intersectionally as I would like. Black women were integral to the party. However, the hyper-masculine image of the Black Panther Party, the gender roles and misogyny allowed the women to be largely unaffected by the experience then. J. Edgar Hoover's violently racist passion project and continue the work of community outreach. Lastly, the Black Panther Party newspaper intentionally made links between the Black American solidarities and struggles and the struggle of oppressed people globally. These cross-ethnic, expansive solidarities created a network of counter-hegemonic, counter-imperialist groups to sustain the revolutionary work rather than silo its efficacy to one part of the world. In short, Douglas's work to envision and create images of Black people counter to mainstream media serve as empowering to its party, members, and other marginalized groups. Even further, it is a direct social, political, and economic critique through iconography and the visual, and that is what makes it a revolutionary aesthetic. Chapter 2, Ernest Cole, Fugitive Photographer. Ernest Cole's life and body of work, House of Bondage, is another side of this activist art practice. A native South African, Cole worked at Drum Magazine and took photos on the side. However, he intervened with the system of apartheid by shifting from hobbyist to documentarian. Cole applied to change his racial status in South Africa from Black to colored, which afforded him more physical mobility throughout the country. By doing this, Ernest was able to clandestinely travel throughout forbidden areas to photograph the atrocities of apartheid from a Black South African perspective. Cole's photos of Black South Africans evokes feelings of the sublime. The black and white of the images create a sensuality of the photos which draw viewers into understanding the subjects, empathizing with the surroundings of the sitters. These raw, urgent, and intimate shots of the desolate are structured into a narrative story. The black and white photographs of these photographs do not suggest that the photo is old, but rather that there is that emphasize the stark color line and the enormity of difference being experienced in South Africa. Young Black South Africans and children are seen as moving through. The transience of Ernest Cole is reflected through this in the dynamism of each photograph. Everything in Cole's photos are the byproducts of the artificial poverty constructed by the white South African governments. The storytelling done throughout House of Bondage is the type of decolonial grassroots aesthetic work which makes House of Bondage culturally relevant and significant to this discussion. His process of travel, the production and care for these images over the course of his travel, and his ultimate decision to expatriate himself to the States in order to publish this book are those principles and actions which inform his activist protest aesthetic. So why does this matter? Ernest Cole and Emory Douglas set the visual icons and the foundation for our understanding of creating protest imagery. The way that they contextualize dissent is the same way contemporary artists contextualize dissent now. Their artistic practices go beyond skill into the realms of community engagement, access, and accessibility, the small d democratic functions of equity and self-determinacy. Cole and Douglas created the tradition of revolutionary artistry, which contemporary artists manipulate and appropriate within neocolonial and liberal systems that persist today. A revolutionary aesthetic may not look one specific way, formally, as in color, style, and figuration, but revolutionary aesthetics do prioritize ideological concepts and social political goals, and privileged mediums which are user-friendly, easily distributed, and sustainable and reusable, and leave much room for creative freedom. Contemporary revolutionary aesthetics must also consider the conditions of the audience to inform the messaging and the conduit. I believe that there is value in humor, which provides us opportunities for positive human connection. However, we must move past the hedonistic escapism which social media and the internet provides, the complacency which sharing infographics afford, and become actively invested in the part of social, economic, political, cultural transformation of our society. Globalization, capitalism, and hegemony thrive and subsist off indifference, individuality, and apathy. We must dare to move past the fog and chaos of dominant discourse and engage with our countercultural, counter-hegemonic organizations and ideologies. Thank you.
Amaya, it's like, oh, wait. Right. Shame. He was gonna see the light today. I was always gonna see the light. Oh, yeah. As a graduation. Great. Yeah. But we'll let you know if there's any. Yes.
Yes, you.
We are now going to have a presentation by Savannah Woodson.
Savannah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Savannah Woodson. I'm a senior art history major from St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and I'm so excited for our conversation this evening. So my thesis, which is titled The Art of Masquerading, Examining the Influence of Masquerade and Carnival in the work of Ebony G. Patterson and David Sunu, will explore how both of these contemporary artists have utilized this diasporic visual language of masquerade to imbue their pieces with symbolic meaning. We often look at masquerade and visualize a parade or an object of anonymity. I look at masquerade and see a living archive. Can a colorful, decorated, and detailed object hold a longing memory of freedom and liberation? To me, it does. Throughout the Caribbean and on the African continent, dress and coverings equate to the history and the local traditions of the people. The art of masquerading involves the application of dress, mask, or three-dimensional representations for costume cultural performances, either public or private, to transmit cultural and spiritual stories to other participants and audience members. Our bodies recognize that spiritual and sacred connection to the traditions derived from our community in which we came. Masquerade isn't just an act of deception, but a spirited embodiment of our shared African lineage. Even when we are disconnected from our land, we remain connected to our soul through joyous, mournful, or profound experiences. In my paper, I examine how the visual aesthetics of masquerading practices proves that the ancestral memory of dress and performance has continued across placements and moments in time. This analysis will show how material and visual aesthetics of Carnival masquerade and West African performances both reflect and mold social relationships with each other in a society. To essentially see how we interact with each other based off of our background, and then how these artists are combating the systemic challenges we face through their own artistic vision. Thus, my core question is as such: To what extent are the visual aesthetics and procession of Ebony G. Patterson's Invisible Presence, Bling Memories, and David Sanou's Kimmy Masquerade in honor of Andre Sanou's Qui de Moi reflect a shared experience of cultural meaning making for participants and the audience? In his text, What They Came With, Carnival and the Persistence of African Performance Aesthetics in the Diaspora, Isiabi Orobi asserts that the forceful displacement of African people did not result in cultural erasure. Instead, the significance, semiology, and functionality of African performance survived and evolved through these new age visual forms. For centuries, Western history, specifically within Italy, viewed the mask as a tool of deception. It was a way to hide the face, to commit a sin or a crime. But across the Atlantic, on the African continent, and all throughout the Caribbean, the mask was the exact opposite. It was and still is a tool of manifestation. It's a celebratory and communal visual as seen in carnival processions or West African shows that doesn't just hide a wearer or create this anonymous barrier, but establishes a spirit of active radicalism. In modern times, certain Caribbean or Afro-diasporic masquerading performances like Carnival are viewed as provocative with unbecoming behavior or revealing attire. It has developed to be seemingly so, but the historical and nuanced framework gives insight into why these celebratory moments act as a means of resistance and connects to African-inspired spiritual practices and knowledge systems. Ebony G. Patterson and David Sanou are using this translocated essence to make sure that the history and the culture of the people that colonial powers have tried to make invisible for so long are finally and undeniably seen. My chapters are broken down based on the intro, including the history and carnival traditions and practices. Chapter 1 with the comparative analysis of the work of Ebony G. Patterson and David Sanou. Chapter 2 with masquerading throughout the diaspora, and then chapter 3 with symbolic interactionism and visual aesthetics. So in this piece, Invisible Presence, Bling Memories, Ebony G. Patterson cleverly displays the integration of life and death, enriched with both culture and celebration in her performance. Her procession utilizes a guerrilla-like approach of about 70 participants, and she utilizes people from the local universities in Jamaica from where she's from, and 50 adorned coffins to represent Jamaica's Bling funeral tradition, which is essentially a practice to celebrate ancestors and loved ones who have transitioned on. It's vibrant and it's euphoric, yet it's also somewhat mournful. Patterson decided to march through these public streets of Kingston after being denied formal carnival permits, which essentially turns this typical carnival celebration that we would see into a radical means of protest. The assemblages of her coffins are composed of fabrics, as you see here, flowers, glitter, and other materials to help serve as a layered visual narrative. Through this surface ornamentation, Patterson pays homage to the regional ritualistic culture while establishing a site of symbolic resistance against the socioeconomic inequality and the invisibility of her people. Ebony G. Patterson is a Jamaican visual artist, and she's known for her elaborate mixed media pieces that infuse Black political or social thought with bright colors, as you see in the costumes, textiles, sequins, and found objects. She states, "My work often explores working class cultures and spaces, and the engagements in declaring presence as an act of protest. I aim to elevate those who have been deemed invisible as a result of inherited colonial social structures by incorporating their words, thoughts, dress, and pageantry as a tactic to memorialize them. It is a way to say, I am here, and you cannot deny me." This statement is powerful, and it's essential as she speaks with conviction to let everyone know that our presence is undeniable and we belong in these spaces. Her performance with Bling Memory also creatively alludes to ritualistic practices of various African societies during moments of bereavement.
One must consider through the commemorations and societal celebrations of grief, what else may we be grieving that the artist is striving to articulate? Perhaps it's the grief of being separated across oceans through forced movement. Or it could be the act of one's history tied to those colonial powers who've enslaved their people. Nonetheless, this work is a beautiful example of how presence and cultural ritual align to create meaning for this shared community within Jamaica. David Sanu, Kemi's Masquerade, is a sculptural tribute to his own father's artistic legacy and the masquerading traditions of Burkina Faso. His dad was also a famous artist, working in similar fashion to that of David's work. David originally began his apprenticeship in his own father's studio, Andre's studio. Featured in the New African Masquerades exhibition, the Kemi Masquerade piece uses a rich palette of wood, as you see with the headpiece centered above, synthetic dyes, and natural fibers to show how these ancestral and visual forms evolve. By involving David in the curation process of this exhibition, the work is presented not as a static museum or exhibition object, but as a living spiritual tradition that continues to bridge the gap between past lineage and contemporary innovation. Enriched with bright yellows, blues, pinks, and greens on his piece, this work utilizes a beautiful palette that actively goes against the thought of various African art forms being somewhat monochromatic. The fibers fall ever so carefully and become vigorous and dynamic as movement occurs with the wearer. The Kemi Masquerade is also one of the oldest traditions in West Africa. It is designed to represent the hornbill, a bird that symbolizes wisdom and intellect. Similarly to Patterson's processional work, this piece is meant to honor a loved one who's passed on. The process of death and grief is especially spiritual in West African traditions. In Afro-diasporic and Caribbean culture, the funeral tradition consists of a celebration of life that reinforces the communal continuity and pays respect to the individual that has passed on. These rituals are deeply rooted in African cosmologies, yet utilize Christian and European elements due to the history of colonialism. It's a very interesting concept, as these communities often reconcile grief with jubilation and pain with celebration. Typically, West African masks that usually represent a spiritual being are meant to guide the individual to their final resting place and ward off evil spirits along the journey. Drawing from the traditions of the Dagara people of Burkina Faso, for example, grieving is understood as a vital community necessity, a way of life, and a spiritual connection to those that are closest to you. Sanu's work exists within a lineage of Black artists who use maximalism and assemblage to demand space. Beyond Nick Cave, whose sound suits utilize found objects to create a protective skin kind of layer that obscures the body while amplifying its presence, we see visuals of this and also other works of 4 contemporary artists who actively practice across cities in West Africa. Chief Ekpenyong Basi Nassar, Sheku Goldenfinger Fofana, David Sanu, and Hervé Yumbi. These artists also work within the tradition of masquerade and installation work. The main theoretical framework and methodologies for which my research is structured around is symbolic interactionism, and somewhat alongside it is functionalism and postcolonialism. My research methods were based on participant observation from what I've witnessed back home in the Virgin Islands, researching the scholarship on the topic, and content analysis. I also looked at a few exhibition articles for the new Masquerades exhibition and public reactions to the work through social platforms. Social interactionism, a theory founded by George Herbert Mead, is a sociological concept that asserts that symbols are one of the most important elements of visual communication. In this instance, masquerade costumes function as a symbolic object that derive their significance through the dynamic exchange between wearer and the cultural audience. This means traditional African practices, such as those Yoruba people of Nigeria, where masks are revered not as a mere entertainment, but as a tangible presence and living manifestations of spirits, which is essential for the communal cohesion of their people. I was personally interested in knowing how communities create meaning out of elaborate masquerades. Because these intentions are negotiated through ongoing social exchange, they remain very open and fluid. This may also bring up questions regarding globalization, cultural appropriation, and the potential over-romanticization of Carnival and Western practices. In conclusion, the value and inherent significance of materiality, the connection to communities, resisting colonial knowledge production, and producing new forms of resistance through an exploration of masquerading artifacts and celebrations is fundamentally necessary. The work Patterson and Sanu are doing involving masquerade connects back to the overall tradition of celebratory performances, Black diasporic principles of bereavement, and cultural sharing. Their visual aesthetics and productions are a testament to their audacity with platforming the practices of Caribbean and West African artists. The work of Ebony G. Patterson and David Sanu proved that cultural meaning making is established through symbolic representations, community engagement, and utilizing various artistic techniques. These artists essentially demonstrate that cultural meaning making is not a static inheritance, but a vital negotiation between artists, the participant, and whoever's within the community, and the collective shared experience. Thank you.
Let's put on the title. Let's go.
Sorry.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Asada Young. I'm a graduating senior art history major from Chicago, Illinois. So throughout my matriculation through Spelman, I've been encouraged to think radically, and I've also been encouraged by movements where Black women have shown forms of radical resistance, specifically through art. So tonight I'll be presenting my thesis project, Material Strategy, Institutional Scarcity in Black Feminist Artistic Practice under and beyond the WPA, where I will be examining material culture under a Black feminist lens from the creation of the Works Progress Administration in 1935, specifically the Federal Arts Project, to the present. So, the Great Depression didn't just collapse the economy, it essentially restructured American cultural production. So with the loss of private patronage, artists lost financial stability. So art was reframed as more non-essential because survival was the priority after the Great Depression. This really exposed how much artists, as well as artist production, depended on wealth, access, and these elite systems of support. So in response, President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal, which aimed to stabilize the economy and provide jobs, including for artists. The WPA's Federal Art Project was radical because it redefined art as labor and public service, positioning artists as workers. As Frances B. O'Connor describes, it was aimed to create art for the millions, expanding access to both art and artistic work.
This is where I wanted to look at it from a deeper perspective. As Erica Doss argues, these programs were deeply shaped by systems of public visibility, taste, and institutional control, meaning that even as access expanded, it was still regulated. So what we see here is not just pure democracy, but a system where access and power operate simultaneously. While the WPA was created for opportunities, it didn't necessarily dismantle inequality. Black women artists were often redirected into roles shaped by racialized or gender expectations, for example, spaces of education, craft, or community work. But rather than seeing these roles as marginal, I argue that they become radical sites of possibility. Through a Black feminist framework, these artists transform materials associated with domestic labor into tools of resistance and meaning. And what's radical here is that they redefine value itself. What I'll explain later on in my thesis is that value is no longer based on permanence or prestige, but based on care and labor and also lived experience. My thesis argues that the WPA structured a hierarchy of artistic value through unequal access to materials. The New Deal redefined the artist as a worker, but not all artists had equal access to that system. I argue that women of color transform material limitation into a radical strategy using materials like plaster, fabric, and found objects to challenge dominant ideas of permanence, prestige, and legitimacy. So instead of asking what these materials lack, I ask what they do in ways that they produce meaning. So my project uses three methods. First, I use archival research to examine what and how these WPA policies were and how they structured access and production. Second, visual and material analysis to understand how these materials shape meaning through work. And then third, Black feminist and material theory, drawing from scholars like Jane Bennett, Sarah Ahmed, and Tina Camp, which I'll reference throughout my presentation. I also wanted to define three terms that I use a lot throughout my project. So institutional scarcity, talking about resource limitation structured by systems of power. Material agency, the idea that materials actively shape meaning. And Black feminist theory, a framework that centers race, gender, and resistance. Augusta Savage is really central to my thesis because her work makes material politics possible and visible. In Gammon, as you see on the right on this screen, on the right, she sculpturally depicts Black boyhood in a painted plaster, bronze-like, pay attention, bronze-like, surface, creating a tension between appearance and reality. To me, this is revealing that value is constructed and not inherent. That tension becomes even more powerful in Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is on the left. Created for the 1939 New York World's Fair, the sculpture was huge, over 16 feet tall, and it depicted a group of Black singers, and also drawing on James Weldon Johnson's Black National Anthem. But despite its scale and significance, it was made entirely of plaster and never cast in bronze due to lack of funding. After the New York Fair, it was destroyed. And this is critical to my thesis because the work was not lost just because it lacked meaning or because it wasn't good. It was actually the most photographed work at the fair. But it was lost because Savage lacked that access to materials and institutional support. So here material becomes the difference between visibility and disappearance. So I wanted to also touch on Savage's role as an educator because I see this just as radical as her work. In her book, Augusta Savage, Inhabiting Black Modernism, Kelly Jones describes Black artistic practices as rooted in networks of care, mentorship, and collective production. I tied this to Savage's work at the Harlem Community Arts Center, where she taught and created a space for mentorship and collective production. And through a Black feminist lens, this essentially shifts away from individual achievement and more towards community and survival. In my third chapter, Surface, Illusion, and the Construction of Value, I really wanted to ask the question of how do we recognize value? I highlight how Augusta Savage and Nicolene Thomas both manipulate surface to challenge perception in their work. So like I mentioned before, Augusta Savage uses plaster, a material often dismissed as temporary. But at first glance, like I mentioned before, that bronze-like casting, the work appears to carry the authority and permanence that we associate with traditional sculptures. But once we realize what the material actually is, that illusion kind of breaks down and exposes how much value is tied to perception rather than what it actually is. Similarly, Mickalene Thomas uses rhinestones, a material often considered artificial or decorative to sort of mimic luxury and not actually be luxury. Her surfaces are layered and also labor intensive, which complicates the idea that rhinestones are less valuable. Sorry. In both of these cases, these artists are not just working with materials, they're manipulating surface and using illusion as a strategy. What appears permanent or luxurious is not necessarily valuable. It's constructed through context and power. So essentially this chapter, my chapter 3 argues that institutions determine what is valuable, but we must understand that materials themselves are the active agents of meaning making. Okay, my fourth chapter, I shift the focus from Savage to a more broad and intergenerational perspective, where I examine what I define as Black feminist material lineage, and this is basically how material strategy continues across generations. So what I'm interested in here is not just about influence, but mainly how Black women artists take materials that have historically been dismissed and transform them into powerful tools of memory and resistance and radicalism. So for example, Betty Saar uses found objects in her work, things like fabric, photographs, and everyday items, and transforms them into what scholars describe as charged historical fragments. These materials carry histories of use, circulation, and stereotype. And what Betty Saar does is reconfigure them to confront racial violence and reclaim representation. And all these artists that I listed here also all do that as well. Faith Ringgold, Mickalene Thomas, Olivia Catlett, yeah. But what connects all of them is not just the material, but the overall method. They reclaim what has been dismissed, craft, decoration, everyday objects, and use it to challenge dominant art history. So this is what I define as the Black feminist material lineage, a intergenerational practice that transforms constraint into strategy and redefines value through care and material agency. This shows that material limitation doesn't just disappear over time, it evolves into sustained and deliberate artistic method. This leads to my last chapter, Archives and Absence, where I ask the question of what is allowed to survive in art history. What we often interpret as absence in the archive is not just the result of the lack of artistic production, but rather than the lack of institutional care. So in other words, the archive doesn't only preserve history, but it reflects the same systems of power that shape artistic value in the first place. So the absence in the archive reflects what I talked about with Augusta Savage's Lift Every Voice and Sing. Its deconstruction reflects systems of value tied to material access. It reflects the very hierarchy of material value that I've been tracing throughout the year with my project and my thesis, where access to durable materials determine not only what can be made, but also what it's allowed to endure. But I also did want to add that something that I also have in my thesis is that even though works like Lift Every Voice and Sing were destroyed or discarded, but these things also survive through photographs and collective memory. So that's what I talk about in my thesis, but I know I'm running out of time. Okay, my conclusion. So ultimately, my thesis argues that material is not neutral. It's actually very political. It's where power operates, but also where resistance becomes visible. So the WPA didn't simply support artists, it also structured artistic value through unequal access to materials and preservation. Black women artists responded to these conditions by not only accepting limitation, but also by transforming it through a Black feminist framework. They turned material constraint into strategy, and one rooted in resistance, care, material agency. And this forces us to not only confront art history, but also recognize that art history itself is not neutral. It's shaped by systems of power, and what survives is not always what matters the most. It's what institutions have the resources, willingness, and want to preserve. Yeah, and that's it.
Want to stay up there, or do you want to put your computer down?
Oh, yeah, I'll just stay up here.
Thank you, Sarah, Amaya. Thank you, Savannah. Thank you, Lawrie.
I would. We had two questions from our question and answer online. From Rhonda Hanberry. For all of you, how will you implement your research in the field and also prospective employment opportunities?
Sorry. So I actually got this book from Dr. Hausman called Curatorial Activism. And I've kind of been really interested in making sure that anything I produce has a message, which is kind of part of my presentation today. So just making sure that I'm very intentional with like whatever I choose to do in the future, especially because I really value Black queer artists. And so that's something that I feel like is really important to the Black art canon. And so just making sure that I'm platforming those people who are usually not marginalized and forgotten about, and making sure to write those stories.
I guess I can go next. So obviously being from the Virgin Islands, one of my biggest passions is kind of establishing an arts epicenter within the Caribbean. So whether that's or that be through a future business plan of mine with creating my own arts center down there and just kind of making, you know, the Caribbean a focal point as LA might be, as New York might be, as all these other, you know, localized artistic spots are, and just kind of platforming Caribbean artists, platforming, you know, people throughout the diaspora, even like with this, you know, Caribbean art is not necessarily a main point within the European art canon, but it can be, and it can come to that in the future. So I'm just really passionate about creating these spaces where we can learn, where we can share this knowledge, where we can produce new knowledge based off of, you know, specific cultures, specific people that are often underrepresented and not necessarily put on a pedestal like various other artists. So that's my answer.
I can go next. As mentioned before, I'm an art history and econ major, minor, dual thing going on there. So I'm interested in going into appraisals and the art of appraising. So I feel like looking at materials and material agency and what things are worth and value, what they used to be worth and value what they're valued now, what they value to me versus Savannah, like that's really important to me. And I became even more interested in it doing my thesis. Yeah, I'm excited to see it's out in my career.
Well, I would say first going into my thesis, I actually want to expand upon it and add more to the grammar and the conversation I did have within it. As I was going, I know in the last panel, someone talked about it being a deep dive into a spiral into like all the history and like the academia and the work that goes within the topics that we did choose. So I will say that I definitely have my own spiral and rabbit holes that I still want to be able to dive into and see more in articulating kind of this visual grammar. Within my own work, career-wise and professionally, I want to be both in the entertainment and art world, and I really want to be helping to continue these conversations about how women show up in these fields as well too, within that being our aesthetic visually or just in the persona or how we continue to like thrive in these spaces. So yeah.
Thank you, everyone, yeah. Thank you, Amaya. Actually, the next question is for you from Kayla Golden. Lovely presentation, Amaya. My question is, were there any other artists you considered for your paper but decided against?
Well, first, hey Kayla. I guess like yes, there was. So I would say for my visual artists, I thought of using Nicolene Thomas and Carrie Mae Williams and Deanna Lawson. Just in how they also create a different articulation of how the Black female body does show up in our sexuality as well. In terms of like performing artists too, I thought about using Cardi B, especially through like the popular culture, you know, controversy that happened around her song like WAP and how that did kind of go within Megan Thee Stallion as well. I kind of wanted to have like two different sides, like Beyonce being like respectability and having institutional like protection, while Megan Thee Stallion was like this excess that has actually started to create her own institutional protection as well too, as you know we see now in modern day. But I wanted to have like two different spectrums and different sides of how we do show up. So I thought in adding like Cardi B, that would be like two, it wouldn't be balanced anymore, to be honest. Like it would be two Megans and two Cardi B's on one side, and then you have Beyonce on the other. So I feel like they could be interchangeable, but they would tell two different stories as well too, and having conversations with them.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Robin? Yes, please go to the mic.
Congratulations.
Turn on. Push it up.
Hello.
Yeah.
Congratulations to all of you. You all gave phenomenal presentations, and I'm very proud. I understand firsthand all of the work and rigor that goes into writing a 50-page thesis, and even more the challenge of fitting that all into 15 minutes. So y'all did great. And I wanted to ask, was there anything that you wanted to include in your presentation from your thesis that you maybe had to cut for time, or, you know, things like that, since I know you've had so much content?
Was that what Bender made you cut it?
Yes.
So, Emory Douglas and Ernest Cole are like incredible artists, and both, like the whole archive for the Black Panther Party newspaper, as well as House of Bondage, just have like incredible amounts of really cool things to look at. And so there was like never enough time to interact with every single still in House of Bondage or every single issue of the Black Panther Party newspaper. So like every time I saw something new, I was like, oh, I can talk about this, and like I don't have time for that. But I will say one thing that I really, really wanted to talk about as far as Emory Douglas was the other artists that he brought in to be a part of the Black Panther Party newspaper, like Matalaba and H.P. Elias. These artists were also like really dedicated to the Black Panther Party platform, and they utilized their mediums inside of the newspaper to kind of get that point across. And I think that it's interesting that even though the Black Panther Party doesn't necessarily platform the women who are part of the party, that a lot of the newspaper production was done by women of the party members. And so that was just an incredible thing that I noticed and learned as I was interacting with material.
Savannah, you want to answer?
Yeah. Some things, or a few things that I cut, Like I said, my thesis focused on the Works Progress Administration, which is right after the Great Depression. And it was a movement where we saw a lot of the rise of a lot of great Black arts, not just visual arts. So something that I cut from my presentation was the theater art. So same way it was the federal art project, it was also for writing and theater. And I'm an appreciative person of all of the arts, so I did want to include that, but yeah, 15 minutes.
Last question for the evening.
Hi, my question is for Savannah. You used a term, the romanticization of Carnival. And can you talk a little bit more about that and how maybe, masquerade can also be gatekeeping from other cultures? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, Ming. That's a wonderful question. So essentially, my vision and my understanding with the over romanticization of Carnival practices and not celebratory performances, of course, as some of you all may have witnessed on different social platforms or, TikTok, Instagram, there are a lot of like visuals of within the parades specifically, because Carnival is like a whole week of events, Juve, the parades. But within the parades, you see these costumings, you see the masquerade, you see the bold colors, the feathers, the whole like elaborate design work. And I think sometimes it can be, like I was saying, shown in a provocative manner or over sexualized. As we are discussing, the female body, the Black female body, but the design work of these objects and of these costumes are a little more, visible to the eye. So I think people that may not understand the culture or the practices or even how it has transformed over time, because it wasn't like that during slavery. Like, Carnival began back then when the enslaved, and specifically like Trinidad and Tobago, they weren't able to practices in the European colonial practices. So they were excluded from those, so they kind of established their own Carnival and what that meant to them. So with the over-sexualization, it has transformed and developed in a way over time from what it was originally meant to be. But I do think there's a lot of controversy around that. There's a lot of people wanting to be involved in the culture, even take advantage of it as well, as we're seeing in contemporary moments. But then also with the not understanding what that kind of means to the specific society, what the visuals represent. And it's not all, revealing dress wear. There are others, I even participated in Carnival when I was little. Like the costumes, the meaning, the stories behind it are very important. So, not romanticizing as an outsider, I think is pretty necessary, but then also kind of informing and gaining that knowledge on the subject, gaining that understanding about what it means. Like even as I talk about symbolic interactionism and how the symbols, the costuming, the masquerades, the dress, they all kind of reflect something about the meaning of these traditions, about the meaning of the celebratory performances and what that entails for the culture. So I think just, informing oneself is very important and not necessarily, trying to demonize a certain culture or a certain practice. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. A round of applause for our panelists. A round of applause for all of our presenters this evening. Thank you everyone for your time and attention this evening. I'd also like to thank quickly family and friends who are in the room and who are also online. I'd like to also acknowledge many alumni in the audience from the collective as well as the department. I'd also like to acknowledge that the juniors are in the room. So these are students who will be presenting the same thing next year, most likely in the last week of April. And so I am very proud of them too. And with that, I will turn it over to Ebony.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Dr. Webb Binder, for shepherding these amazing, brilliant students through the thesis project this year and for your role in not just thesis, but also, let me go there.
I should do that. I'll go over here.
Okay, hello. Hi, real quick point out there on camera. I'm Cheryl Finley. I just wanted to say thank you again to Dr. Webb Binder for her vision and her hard work, her dedication, and the way that she works so thoughtfully with the students in our program, that she has the power and the strength to say, oh my God, this is so amazing, you've got to go for this. And then to say, actually, you need to cut that and that and that. So Dr. Webb Binder has been with this program since before I even began. And she's in the Department of Art and Visual Culture here at Spelman. And she also, I think, is someone who has played a really instrumental part, not just in the thesis, which is a year-long course. Students enroll they take it in the fall and the spring, end up with 50 pages by the end of the semester. But the year before, typically, but not always, they also enroll in two courses that help them to build and understand what it means to write in the discipline of art history. And Dr. Webb Binder, not always, but very frequently, is the person who helps to guide our students through that process, especially in the second semester course, where they begin to think about the kinds of things that they might ultimately wish to write about. So I just wanted to, give you a special shout out because of the work that you've done so long. But there also, I don't know if everyone's still here, but Professor Nagawa is with us here. Dr. Chausman is with us here. Dr. Ola was with us here, but he is not here anymore, but he's also, all of these professors, Dr. Dawkins as well, have been really, really instrumental. Professor Laxalt, she is not here anymore, but again, just to think about the community of scholars that we have here at the Atlanta University Center that are really amazing examples to our students and who mentor them and work with them throughout the time that they're here. Our professors are here at Spelman College, but they're also at Clark Atlanta University and Morehouse College, and we're really thankful to all of your hard work with our students. So I just wanted to say thank you again. And I'd also like to mention Rachel Brown and Cheyenne Bryant. Hello, Rachel. So they are the power and the promise behind the AUC Art Collective. They make it run, and they make it run so beautifully and seamlessly all the time. We never have any mistakes. There's never any problems. We never don't have connectivity and things like that because they just, magically wave a wand and things happen. But no, they work tirelessly. I want to say tirelessly behind the scenes, always to bring a really, I think, moving. I'm moved. I think I usually shed a tear or two when you all are presenting. You might not see, but they always help to prepare a really moving and meaningful experience for all of you. And they're so incredibly thoughtful. They think about the kinds of things that actually they know the things that you like. I was like, we have chicken and waffles. Yeah. So I mean, they know what you like, and I think that that's a talent that we're really, really just grateful to have, because one of the things that's so important about the work that we do here, about the AUC Art Collective as an entity that is dedicated to and committed to bringing about training, mentoring, teaching, inspiring the next generation of leaders in the larger arts ecosystem here in Atlanta, nationally, in the United States, in the Americas, on the continent, globally. It's really that type of dedication that helps us to build a community. And community is something that you all have talked about in your presentations. Community is so important, and I hope that all of you, I think just as Dr. Webb Binder said, there are alumni here in the room. Kayla Golden, shout out to you again, Kayla. You're down there at Tulane, and hopefully one of our students will be applying for the next cohort that you're in.
Alexander Nelson's on too.
Oh, Alexander too. Okay, cool. So, you know, and Alexandra's at the Studio Museum in Harlem. So just to kind of think about the community of, you know, of your peers that are here to support you, whether they're in the room, or whether they're, you know, online, but also the opportunities that you have before you because of the others who've paved the way ahead of you. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't thank your families, your parents, your friends, and all those who came out to support you. And, and I also just want to, you know, join my colleagues, Rachel and Cheyenne, but also all of the faculty in thanking the Alice L. Walton Foundation, who has supported generously our program for the past 8 years. And I think without their vision and thought behind how it is that we might be able to think about a more level playing field in the visual arts ecosystem where Black leadership is concerned, with that vision, we've been able to begin to make an impact in this world. And I know that it will be something that will make a difference for so many going forward. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone, except I think the last thing I'll say is to thank the leadership at Spelman College, at Morehouse College, and at Clark Atlanta University, and our amazing resources at the Robert W. Woodruff Library here on campus, and also at our museums, the Spelman Museum and the Clark Atlanta University Museum. These are your laboratories, your libraries, the places where you learn in situ, and the Spelman Archives. Holly Smith, give a shout out to her. Oh, and lastly, I'm sorry, I know I said Dr. Webb, did I just say a few words in here? Okay. So the last thing I think I want to say is that, you know, institutional memory is really important. And so we had this like, we had this chat going on between us administrators, you know, running the show today. And so we were aware when some of you were giving your presentations that there were certain things that you had done since your matriculation, whether you began as an early college program student or whether you started when you were a junior in the program, but that you had done that helped to shape, you know, not just who you are as scholars and curators, but also helped to shape the ideas that you had for your theses. So Daniel, I know that you interned at the kitchen with Legacy Russell, and that probably had a little bit of an influence in what you might have started to think about. Also your professors as well. And I think that these kinds of things, oh, of course, yes, and Ebony Patterson, yes, okay, so meeting Ebony Patterson in New Orleans, and whether it's an internship where you have been able to work in New York City or in Lagos, or whether you went to to New Orleans to an art fair, or actually went to New Orleans because you interned there. These are the types of opportunities and experiences that this program, thanks to the generosity of the Alice L. Walton Foundation, has been able to achieve for our students. So, you know, we could have this program where, you know, you're only in your classrooms, you might only be in the library, and that's the way that you learn. But one of the things that we believe and that we tried to do in designing this program from the start was to make sure that you had professional experiences so that you can go out there and assume those leadership roles. And they've been varied. And I just want to shout out Rachel Brown again for her leadership and administration of that paid summer internship program. We have students that are going to Lagos, again, with the Nkashonabari Foundation this year, to New York, to so many places, the Faith Ringgold Estate, and many other places. We're SFO Museum, Woodruff Library, that's right.
London over there.
Oh, that's right. Yes. So Listen Gallery in London. So, I mean, these are the kinds of experiences in addition to what you do in the classroom, or if we have an academic field study opportunity where you can be in community with these leaders. I'd like to think, I mean, I know that they've touched you in ways that you probably don't realize now. You'll figure it out maybe, you know, a year, 5 years, 10 years from now. So I just want to say thank you all again for bearing with me with my 1 minute of remarks. And we're so excited for you to graduate and go on and do all the really wonderful things that you're going to do in the future.
My God.